All right, we're here live with Daniel Turner back on the podcast. Real quick before we start, this episode's sponsored by Blockware Solutions. If you're interested in learning more, you can visit blockwaresolutions.com/energy. They're a great group. They do hosted Bitcoin mining stuff. I know the price has been hammered lately, but that means the cost of buying Bitcoin mining has gone down, and they're a really great group to check it out. You can visit blockwaresolutions.com/energy. Daniel, thanks for coming back on, man.
Oh, it's awesome to be on with you. Thanks. I'm just tweeting it out that I am here with you. So it is great to be here again on your podcast. Thank you.
You know, there's a lot to talk about. Before we launch into some of these topics, just what's been going on in your world, what's been on your mind lately. I'm sure you guys have been plenty busy.
Yeah, it's really remarkable, right? I mean, I think of those guys who were on the top of the crow's nest, right, at the Titanic, and they were watching this iceberg, and they saw it coming, and they reacted, right? They were like, holy cow, ring the bell, do something, turn the ship.
Yeah.
I feel like this administration, we see this iceberg ahead of us, and it's getting closer and closer, and we just make no course correction. I mean, and I know we're going to go through a lot of the things that have happened in this space recently, but I mean, since the last couple of times I've talked to you, I mean, I think the first time I was on your show, you know, gas was hovering around $3 a gallon nationwide, and oil was just about to hit 100, and it's just gotten worse and worse, and no one is changing the direction of the ship. So it's just been incredibly frustrating to watch in real time. Really sad.
It's tough because there are things, you know, look, at the end of the day, I want to be fair and say, you know, look, presidents, do they control the price of oil, the price of gas? No, technically they do not, but there are lots of policy decisions that happen over many years that can influence these markets. We saw it with Jimmy Carter. We've seen it in the past where there can be massive policy decisions that can change the energy markets fairly dramatically. And I think that, you know, there are things that could be done today and that could have been done before this that could at least have helped things. Maybe not like fully relieved everything, but some of the stuff that they're doing is it's like, you know, yelling at the sky or something. I mean, maybe talk a little bit about this recent letter that they wrote. And I know you guys put out a response to it, but that they wrote to the oil executives.
Yeah, this morning it was pretty early that I saw the administration announce that Joe Biden had sent a strongly worded letter to 7 oil and gas CEOs demanding that they increase production. And that's not how it happens, right? I mean, I demanded my shower increase pressure. You know, it doesn't rely on Joe Biden still has this notion of like these evil CEOs like Scrooge McDuck sitting there playing with their gold. And they're all on a conference call and they're all deciding things. And they're saying, he also thinks, I think like a lot of Americans do, that oil and gas work like spigots, right? And you can turn them on and off, and you want to increase the pressure today? Okay, we'll just pump a little more. Do you want to decrease? Okay, just pump a little less. And obviously, you know that that's not how it works. And so this letter just, it shows an awful lot of energy ignorance, but it's also pretty funny, right? Because it was only a couple of years ago, and we have a video coming out about this pretty soon. It was only a couple of years ago, Biden was saying that he wanted to put CEOs of these companies in jail. I mean, literally, we're going to lock them up for what they have done to this planet and what they have done to contribute to climate change. And the audience all clapped, right? So Mr. Tough Guy, you know, candidate 2 years ago was threatening jail time for them. And now he's like, gosh darn it, how come you're not doing your job? It's just amazing that there's this incredible disconnect of what he says about them and then what he expects them to do when he's dealing with political fallout.
Yeah, it's, you know, the whole thing is that if you're really, really hostile to an industry, right, and you tell them that your goal, and he's pretty explicit about it, and there's, I mean, just a bunch of videos of it. It's not like this is even some kind of conspiracy theory tinfoil hat thing. I mean, he just straight up says that that he wants no more drilling. He wants no more, you know, that he wants the oil and gas industry to basically shrink or to suffer from the policies that they want to put forward. And the excuse is to accelerate to this, you know, this energy transition. And we're going to get into that here in a little bit, some of the things they've done recently on solar panels. But that, again, that's not how it works, right? And so if you have an industry where you're constantly telling them that you want to kill the industry, but then, you know, now all of a sudden when things are bad, you know, you're out of the other side of your mouth, you're saying, well, wait a second, why aren't you guys drilling more? Why aren't you guys producing more? You need to do that. It's just very inconsistent, and it seems very intellectually just kind of dishonest. And do you think people are really buying this? Do people really believe this stuff, or is it just kind of rhetoric?
No, they don't, and the polling numbers shows that, and that's why he's getting more and more frustrated, right? Because the polling shows that people believe this has been caused because of Biden's policies. I mean, gas prices or oil prices had already pretty much doubled by the time Putin invaded Ukraine, and so you say, well, it's caused by Vladimir Putin. They weren't buying it then because they were already starting to feel the pinch back in December. He's blamed, they've called these CEOs before Congress several times now and had their, grandstand moment. They've all cut their campaign ads, right? Their fancy wingback chairs, and they've got their glasses at the tip of their nose and they're wagging their finger. I mean, just typical congressional BS. But again, it's funny that when you just look at Joe Biden as a candidate, how tough he was. He's going to stand up to Vladimir Putin, right? He told, it was one of the debates, I'm the only guy up here who can stand up to Putin. Remember, he said, I looked at Putin and I said, you don't have a soul. And he looked at me and said, we understand each other. And everyone was supposed to be like, oh, my, right. But now what did you say about Putin? I can't do anything. I can't do baby formula. It's Putin's fault. I can't do gas and oil prices. It's Putin's fault. I thought you were going to stand up to Putin, right? Where does all this tough guy rhetoric go? So when you said, is it intellectually dishonest? It absolutely is. It's politicians use phrases that I hate so much, and one of them is stand up to. I'm going to stand up to big oil. I'm going to take on as another one. I'm going to take on the oil industry. Well, you've used all your rhetoric. You got all your bluster out. Look at the results. Oh, shouldn't you just be a little bit more of a tough guy and own it and say, you know what, I did cause this because I wanted it to happen because these guys need to come up and so I don't know. It's funny that the two Joe Biden campaigning Joe Biden and governing Joe Biden, they're not exactly the same person.
Yeah, and it's not just, you look at, like, I think John Kerry was in the news this week too, and he said that it is dangerous to make comments that, this transition to green energy is causing, energy prices to go up, and that's a dangerous line of talk, and that we can't go there. And it's like, but wait a second, it's supply and demand, right? I mean, we'll get into here in a minute what they're trying to propose to do about it. But at the end of the day, right, it's like we need more supply. The U.S. is the largest producer in the world. We have the ability to unlock supply, but do we have the political will? And it seems like the climate czar and the Biden administration, they don't have the political will. And there's nothing that I'm seeing that they're putting forward. Is there anything right now that you're seeing that they're putting forward that could actually alleviate any of this, or is it all just counterproductive?
No, there's absolutely nothing they can do. There's nothing that their current policies will do that will alleviate this. And in fact, I think it's going to get worse. Goldman Sachs said gas prices will be at above $6 by August a gallon. Last I saw, I forget what bank it was, said it will be at $7 by August. So even their Wall Street is already speculating gas prices are going to be higher. So there's nothing we can do. But again, it's this silly notion that oil and gas are somehow supplanted by wind and solar, and they're different physical properties, right? They do different things. And yes, some oil and gas is used for the production of electricity and for the automobile industry and for cars and trucks. And in theory, the electric vehicles will supplant that. But that's a fraction of what oil and gas does. And so we bought into this notion that, well, you know how we lower oil prices? We produce more solar panels. And you say, but that's not it quite literally. It's the princeps analogarum. If you go back to Aristotle's logic, it's the literal example of apples and orange comparison. Like you can't remotely say, well, how do we lower oil prices? We produce solar panels. It's like, how do we gain more weight? Or how do you lose more weight? Well, you buy fewer hats. So what the hell does that mean? It's illogical, and that's where we are. John Kerry shows his true ignorance. I tweeted this yesterday. We will look back at a certain point and wonder how someone so unbelievably dumb, not to mention haughty and arrogant and disdainful of Americans, but someone so incredibly dumb had so much power in this country. And it's remarkable to see him up there on a stage. That was yesterday at USC, University of Southern California, who, as a Notre Dame fan, I despise. And they haven't beaten us in football in over 2,035 days. But just a little aside there. Just amazing to see him on stage at USC in his tie and his legs crossed and his funky socks and just God, what an abysmally dumb human being.
It seems like
shockingly dumb.
Yeah, it seems like a I don't know if they're dumb or if it's just the role that they're playing and they think that they can play people off. I mean, they're either dumb, they're like dumb like a fox, right? It's like, are they, I think there's just so much special interest in constituents. I mean, the way politics works, right, is that you have people in your states and in the regions that vote a certain way, and then there's companies and corporations that help write these laws. I mean, let's face it, lobbyists get paid by corporate America, and then corporate America puts things into bills, and then it gets voted in. And so you start to wonder, like, how much of this is just because this is what the constituents or the people that are backing these other parties want versus how much of it is really going to help. But then you see, like, it's like backwards, like this. They're talking about recently, hey, we're gonna tax the profits of oil companies, but we're also going to remove taxes from gasoline taxes. So then we can, basically tell the public, look, we lowered our taxes on gasoline and we tax these evil, greedy oil companies. Well, what do those two things actually mean? Well, on one hand, you're lowering taxes on gas, which means you're going to spur demand because that's going to make it to where it's less taxes on gasoline, so demand goes up, and then you're reducing supply by, taxing the profits of these oil and gas companies. So you're doing the opposite of what you would need to do to actually lower prices. But it sounds good. It's a good soundbite, right?
It does. Yeah. And I think it's one of the reasons why, and you're the prime example of this, Max, but it's why so many people who are in the energy space are also in the crypto space, because the things that they share in common is a tremendous amount of decentralization and freedom. And philosophically, I think the reason why the left, the true left, not the Democrats, like real leftists, why they hate energy so much, is because it's one of the few industries that is not in the hands of the state. And there's some publicly traded companies, right? But otherwise, it's in private sector hands, and it's also why they hate crypto world, is because it is in private hands. And if you are a statist, as John Kerry is, as Joe Biden is, your currency has to be controlled by the government, right? Of course, it has to be centralized in the Federal Reserve. It has to be. It's also why they want to tax. What was the original proposal? Was it any bank transaction above $20 or $200? It was an absurdly low number, right? And it's also why they hate the energy space and why they love wind and solar, because wind and solar requires is a huge command and control economy. It requires government mandates. It requires government negotiating with China to buy these billions of dollars worth of slave labor made wind and solar. It requires government confiscation of land, right? It's a huge command and control. It's not private, it's government. And they love government. They genuinely believe private things are dangerous. They're a threat. And so, I don't know. They're coming at you from both ways, Max.
Well, yeah, I mean,
you're both energy and crypto. So you're a threat.
It's why I like Bitcoin and mining, is because it is energy-backed money. You can create it with natural gas, which is what one of our companies does. And it is outside of the system. It's kind of its own thing, and it's like gold, right? I mean, gold. There's no government saying that that's money. That's just money for thousands of years, and it took a lot of energy to mine it because you had to go and find it, and it was hard to create. It was scarce, and so that's what drew me to it, was the energy side of it. And then I stuck around for the pro business, pro freedom, kind of free market side of it. That's the part that really, once I dug into it, I was like, well, that's really cool too. At first, I was just like, I can sell energy for a higher price. And then I got into the kind of the philosophy of it. But you're right. It is a level of control. And it's not just control of industry. More and more, and we talked about this, I think, on our first episode, it's more and more now control of free speech and of the narrative. And I don't remember the official that it was. It was a woman, and this came out yesterday or the day before. You could maybe help me remember. But she said that it's not enough to combat, people that question climate science. Now we have to start censoring people that question energy sources. We have to shut down any speech around saying things like, renewables are expensive, or that, natural gas can lower emissions. Like, those are dangerous. That's dangerous speech. And that the social media companies need to step up, and they need to start censoring people for having discussions around energy, which really hit home for me because, look, I'm not like as pro oil and gas as I am. I'm also just pro things that work. And I've spent a lot of time researching renewables. I've had guests on the show, a lot of people on the show that are in the energy transition. So it's not that I don't believe in innovation or technology, but I believe in the ability to discuss it and to decide for ourselves what we think is best. And so that stuff really freaks me out, to be honest.
Yeah. I think you tweeted it earlier today, or maybe it was yesterday, but it was about that comment to say, if Gina McCarthy, who it was, if she wants to, the tech companies to go after people who dissent, but they keep saying the science is settled. Well, if it's so settled, why do you have to silence everyone who disagrees with it, right? And you're absolutely right. I mean, that was a scary little speech that she gave in tech world to say, like, we need you to do your part, because we're offering a different side that is censored by definitely the Biden administration. But why are you so afraid of our facts? Right. I mean, John Kerry, his speech yesterday, John Kerry and Gina McCarthy, in case your wonderful audience is unaware, they're two sides of the same coin. Gina McCarthy is the climate czar for domestic issues, and John Kerry is the climate czar who has the better portfolio because he gets to spend all his time in European capitals and on private jets and drinking Chateau Neuf de Pape. And so he chose better. Not that American wine isn't great. But his comments there about the solar stuff was really remarkable. Just this complete detachment from reality and the threatening. Like, we can't allow people to say, "Wow, we're really struggling as a country. Maybe we should drill more oil." Nope, it's a danger. You can't go back to that way. And I just wonder how much worse things have to get before Biden and his minions, McCarthy and Kerry, change things around.
I won't spoil the piece, but Doomberg, who I really like and who's been on the show a few times, it's actually a group of people, but they do a blog or a Substack. If anybody hadn't checked that out, it is a paid Substack, but it's well worth the monthly fee. And he put out a piece. He's put out a couple just absolute killer pieces in the last week. One was on ESG and the pitfalls and the issues there, and then this other one was on the solar stuff that they're doing right now. And one of the key pieces that sticks out to me with the solar stuff is that it's a very heavy industry, right? It requires, a lot of energy to create. It requires a lot of mining. There are aspects to the solar industry that we could do in the U.S., but because of the regulatory environment here, it would make it very difficult to do so. So rather than doing it here, we're now incentivizing China to do it over there. And it's just kind of like, look how clean this is because we imported it from China, but they don't want to have any of that here. It's just not my backyard thing. Again, we've touched on this, but like, why come out so strongly on policies that are pro-China when you could easily try to, spur that industry here? If they're really serious about going to solar panels, let's incentivize American producers and American miners to create these products. I just don't understand why the fixation with getting it from China and incentivizing them instead. It's just really perplexing to me.
It's a great point, and it does raise some just intellectual curiosities, right? I mean, if it is a global climate crisis, and it doesn't matter if the butterfly sneezes here or if the butterfly sneezes in China, it's the same sneeze. If it's a global problem, then we shouldn't allow this to happen anywhere, right? But it's okay if it happens in China. And the question, I guess, is why is it okay if it happens in China? Because we don't have to see it, right? We don't have to deal with the fact that they're 9-year-old girls who don't have hard hats. We're okay with the fact that they don't have to have, holy days off, and they don't have diversity and sexual harassment training for their work staff. So we're okay with it happening in China because we don't have to deal with the fact of that they are, polluting and contaminating water, and they are. So that's one whole side of it. But it also shows the unseriousness of the administration from the geopolitics of it, right? We're talking about how we have to unshackle ourselves from OPEC. Jennifer Granholm, the Secretary of Energy, always talks about the cartel OPEC and they control everything. And okay, so if you believe that, and by the way, that's false, but if you believe that OPEC is in charge and we're all just slaves to OPEC, well, then why would you want to be a slave to China, right? Why would you want to move your means of production? Is China a better partner than the Saudis? I mean, maybe that's a fun question for, late night cigars, but I'd probably argue they're both terrible partners. But if you had to choose, I think Americans as a whole would choose the Saudis over the Chinese, right? And so you're giving up the OPEC cartel to take on the Chinese cartel. And the other thing that's really interesting about it, from the lack of seriousness, is even a 5-year-old kid who opens a lemonade stand just intrinsically understands he's got to get his hands on some lemons, right? He just knows that. Like, I got to get lemons if I'm opening a lemonade stand. And here we have the entire administration pushing us towards this technology, and they're not concerned about the raw materials, right? They don't want to get their hands on the rare earth elements, the metals, the minerals, the gold, the zinc, the graphite, the copper. God, the amount of copper, the cobalt,
Right.
the lithium, so how serious are you if you're like, we're going to have to become the solar capital of the world, but we'll just buy them all from China? So who's in charge? China is in charge. We saw that with COVID, right? With our pharmaceutical industry and our medical industry. We're going to repeat it now with energy. Boy, that's a great formula.
Yeah, well, it's like the European playbook, except you switch out China and you insert Russia. And we saw this kind of not in my backyard thing where they're like, we're going to put in all these renewables. Like Germany's a great example. And they really, just basically deepened their dependence on Russia for the hydrocarbons that they still desperately needed. And then now Russia invades Ukraine. And I can't remember the last time we talked if it was before the Ukraine conflict or not. It might have been right around then. But now they're in a really, really bad spot. And it's not just Europe; it's the U.S. too. I mean, it came out I think yesterday as well. There was a rumor that Biden administration officials are saying now that they're worried that the sanctions on Russia are actually hurting the U.S. because it's causing inflation to get worse. And so you see what's happening in Europe, and you realize how more critical than ever having these sovereign supply chains, having the access to energy, having the access to control our own destiny. And yet we're hearing, China wanting to do what Ukraine's done. They want to do it to Taiwan. And I have some doubts whether they really will, because I think it would be a very bad deal for China. They certainly want to do it, but this idea that we'll just outsource everything from them and that'll put us in a stronger position. Again, it's just it's backwards.
It is, and look, no one wants to enrich Vladimir Putin, and no one wants to be on his side. We should never have been importing or refining any Russian gas because we quite frankly don't need, or Russian oil because we don't need it, or their natural gas, right? I think of the Attorney General of Massachusetts, Maura Healey, who's on record saying that, and this is a couple of years ago, but on record saying that she would rather buy natural gas from Russia than build a pipeline to the Marcellus Shale region, right? And she was reelected. I mean, you think of the lunacy of that statement that we're foregoing American fossil fuels to buy Russian fossil fuels. So I'm prefacing all that to say no one wants Putin to be doing well right now. But again, there is cause and effect. And saying, well, we're going to ban all of the Russian markets for their fossil fuels. What did Russia do? They just made a deal with China. So China is buying Russian oil and natural gas cheaper than the market rate because everyone else is foregoing it. And Putin is doing great, right? I mean, the ruble took a hit early on. It's bounced back. His coffers are not depleted. If anything, he's doing financially very, very well. So you scratch your head and you say, well, then, what was the purpose of this, right? Like, what was the purpose of all these sanctions? And how do we truly extract ourselves from the geopolitics of oil and gas? And the only way you do that is to produce more American oil and gas, right? It's not, this isn't rocket science. And this isn't, you're a shill of the energy industry. This is just the way economics works. There was a reason why Vladimir Putin was quiet for 2018, 2019. One, he thought Trump was crazy and he didn't understand what he was going to do next. I mean, remember Trump said, like, if you do that and he said something like, I will level all of Moscow, or you do something like crazy. He did threaten flat out. Yeah, exactly. Crazy. Right. So that was one part. But secondly, he didn't have the money. The reason why I didn't have the money is because global prices were half of what they are now. The reason why is because of how much we were producing here domestically, and intellectual, concept that you will understand and your audience will understand, but our politicians don't. This is an industry that would much rather make its profit off of volume than off of price. And I don't think people, understand that. But oil would much rather produce 2 barrels at 60 than 1 barrel at 120. Right. And so volume is the way the industry wants to go. And look at the volume they were producing just a couple of years ago. They would like to go back to that, but something is thwarting it. And what's thwarting it is clearly the Biden administration.
Yeah, it's there's something, I read a stat that said that it was like $1 trillion windfall to the American consumers over the last 10 years in terms of the suppressed natural gas prices and oil prices that we had, in terms of what it meant to the consumers here in reduced amount of spending that they had to do for household spending. It was a huge boom for consumers, and it was also highly deflationary. We worry about, people worry about inflation, and it's like a big way to combat inflation is energy prices. And the more we produce, the better that can be for us domestically. But it's not just production; it's also infrastructure. And so I think that what the government has done on both sides of the aisle over the last 30 years is they've really gotten very extensive with these executive branch administrations. You got the EPA and these things that have been weaponized. The FERC now has said they're going to put climate as a consideration with approving any new pipelines, which basically means that they can just cancel any pipeline they want because that's an arbitrary metric. And you look at like recently they just the EPA did not approve, I believe it was 26 refinery permit exemptions. And then, so there's a way to stifle production that's not going after the producers, because the producers have personal property rights, and that's what makes us special in the U.S. is that we have the ability to drill. But now they've weaponized the executive branch, and they're going after the critical infrastructure for the U.S.
Yeah.
It's really bad.
And you can see that based upon what fields are producing and what aren't. And the private fields are actually, so there are certain private fields that are producing more than pre-pandemic levels. The Permian is a great example of that. And the reason why is because of, as you said, private versus public property, right? But where it is public lands, or some sort of BLM, Bureau of Land Management, the original BLM, right? Some sort of that relationship, you do need the permission and the cooperation of government. And if government punishes you every step of the way, then we can't talk about, and I'm a free market believer, but we can't use the lie of free markets are causing this. I dealt with this, I work heavily in the coal space. And I dealt with this during the coal wars of the Obama years. And people were like, the reason why coal is not succeeding is because it can't compete with natural gas. And you say, well, yeah, I guess technically you're right. But if the government decides to charge, an extra $5 on your Whopper and the Big Mac gets $1 off, can you really say, well, the reason why Burger King went under is because of the free markets, right? I mean, and that's what we did with the coal industry, and that's what they're doing now with the oil and natural gas industry. So you've got this command and control economy, Marxist style, that's pushing the Defense Production Act for wind and solar, right? But that's punishing fossil fuels. And what are we going to say as a result? Well, free markets are showing. Come on, Max, it's the free markets show that solar is actually cheaper. Like, what the hell? What free market? Right? You're punishing one industry at every step of the way through government action, and you're favoring another. And this happens across every industry, not just oil and natural gas, right? We do this. The government does this across the board. But this is the result that's going to come of it. And we're going to see, how much does wind and solar actually cost? I have no idea. No one does. And if anyone says they do, they're a liar, right? Wind and solar are proven to be cheap. Really? Were they? Because I have no idea what their cost, because you have these government mandates. We must get 40% of our electricity from wind power by the year 2030. You've got these government mandates. You've got these utility company mandates. You've got government exemptions for. Show me the last time a solar field had to go through an environmental impact study. Right. Pebble Mine's been doing 17 years of environmental impact studies. They just get it waived, right? Whenever they try to build a solar farm, they never find some short-haired weasel habitat, right? Very endangered. The rare western Nebraska short-haired weasel habitat is under threat. No, they never find any of that, right? But when they want to drill a quarter of an acre of land, holy cow. Not only is there a sacred, Native American burial ground there, but there's also the endangered swamp weasel of western Nebraska. But they never find that with wind and solar. So the games the government plays are just infuriating.
It's really interesting. There was a guest that I had on really early on the podcast, and they have like kind of an ESG consulting company, and they work with oil and gas producers to help them navigate these issues. And one of the questions I had was, I said, well, with the ramp up in all these renewables projects coming on, are the renewables companies getting put under more scrutiny, and are they clients for you guys? Have you guys started working more with renewables projects, because there's just so many of them getting greenlit and getting put online? And I was like, that should be a big market for you. And they were like, no, we don't ever, we've tried to talk to a number of them, and they're just not facing the scrutiny that oil and gas is facing. And it's like, well, wait a second. And I've said this before. It's like, if your business model is that the sole purpose of your business model is that we are going to make things greener, more environmentally friendly, shouldn't you be under the most scrutiny? Like, shouldn't that be? Because if you found out that was wrong, you see what I'm saying? Like, it's just like, if that's your whole business model is that we're better for the environment, you should have the most strict regulations, because we should be fact checking that, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And they're waived from all of those things, which is pretty funny. You mentioned the FERC. previously, and FERC is one of those independent agencies, right? They're not supposed to take direction from the White House. Their commissioners are appointed for longer terms than the presidential cycle, and they're staggered, right? All of these things, the FCC, the SEC, the FERC, so that they can truly be neutral arbiters of whatever they are regulating. Or so FERC is supposed to be non-controversial and fairly perfunctory, right? We need to build a pipeline from here to here. Here's all the permits. Here's all the blah blah blah. Just let us start the process. But FERC has totally changed its charter, right? The chairman, Richard Glick, who's up for reconfirmation, announced that now everything was going to be seen through the lens of climate change. Wall Street Journal had a great op-ed over the weekend, or a great article over the weekend, that said that the totally neutral FERC has had a standing bi-monthly meeting with the White House, one of Gina McCarthy's deputies, in the climate world. And you say, well, what's the FERC chairman meeting with the White House every other week for? The climate guy, also, of all people, are they talking about? I remember Bill Clinton when he was on the tarmac with Loretta Lynch, and he was like, "We were talking about my grandkids." It was like, really, for an hour? I remember my dad was like, "You know what? I love my grandkids, and I couldn't talk to anybody about my grandkids for an hour." So what is Chairman Glick talking to the White House about every other week? And then suddenly this charter comes out that we're going to rethink every infrastructure project. We're going to see it through the lens of climate change. And as you so very well said, with a criteria like that, boy, that's pretty fungible and flexible. How do you determine climate change criteria? Well, whatever Richard Glick declares. We have a campaign going, "Don't Fauci the FERC," right? Or don't let these agencies do what other agencies have done, where they are so politicized that teachers unions are deciding if your kids should wear masks, not doctors. Well, the Greenpeace is going to decide if we can build a pipeline and not the government, and that's not the way it's supposed to work.
Yeah, it's freaky what they could do on the permitting side for these things. I mean, we're seeing now out of the Northeast. I mean, there may never be another pipeline built out of the Northeast. I mean, we have the largest gas field, or one of the largest gas fields in the world, in the Marcellus Shale and the Utica Shale. And what is it, the Mountain Valley, I believe, pipeline. I think that's the name, that was supposed to be online last year. It's now billions over budget, and it's been, it's been held up in court over and over again through these environmental activists. And this is a major reason why we can't get new supply to the hubs in the Gulf. And this is why natural gas prices, one of the reasons why. I did a thread on some of them. I actually didn't put this in the thread because it just got too long. I could have kept going, but there's a lot of reasons why nat gas prices are higher. And it's because they're blocking these permits. And one thing that's really scary, like we had this LNG explosion this week, and about a day or two later, they announced, hey, it's going to be 90 days now. We're going to be partially operational if we can get all the required permits. And you had people on Twitter immediately being like, oh, no, this is going to be, because, if that LNG plant goes down, that means we can't export natural gas, which cripples our allies in Europe. But it also makes the price of gas go down here. And so there's, speculation at this point. We don't know if this is, going to happen. But in theory, they could, hold up those permits to get the plant back online, which would then suppress the price of natural gas going into the midterms and would, hurt American businesses in terms of the oil and gas producers. It would also hurt our allies in Europe. So there's real consequences for these permits and these things. This isn't just a game. It can really affect the economy. It can affect energy prices, and it can affect our allies around the world.
No, it can. And then when you take it down to the most human level, the ones that affects the most are the ones who are the most voiceless, the most powerless, the most non-consequential, right? And that's why a lot of our leaders, I was talking to someone about this yesterday, that one of the biggest virtues missing from our leaders is empathy. And I don't mean that in the woke, cushy sense, but I mean in the sense of having the ability to say, well, my job as the elected official is to be able to understand what my constituents or these people are going through, even though I personally am not. And if you would think our elected leaders, you would think the elected leaders of the Northeast would say, there's an 85-year-old woman right now who can barely afford her gas bill, but at least she still has it. And if it goes offline, then what's the consequence?
Right.
What's going to happen this summer with extreme heat, or even worse in the winter? More people die of the cold than die of the heat. And what's going to happen to these folks, right? Are we just going to allow them to die from the elements because we don't want to build a pipeline? And then where's the intentionality, for the Immanuel Kant fans out there, of the green groups that have stopped these pipelines. Will they ever get hauled before Congress to say, you spent millions of dollars of campaigns and hired all these, college kids to tie themselves to pipelines and bang drums and smoke weed, and you won, right? The pipeline wasn't built, but now let me show you the people who are dead, right? Do they count for anything? Or let's talk about food shortages, which is very much driven by fossil fuels. The food shortages that are going to come this year will stagger people, right? I mean, you and I might remember, but maybe some people don't, when we had to sing that god-awful "We Are the World" song because we saw famine around the world. So Bono, I'm sure, is getting his pen and paper ready because there are going to be enormous food shortages around. It's a given, right? Again, we're those guys on the crow's nest watching the iceberg coming saying, yep, it's going to be bad.
What I saw a good tweet the other day. They were saying, "Well, wait until they start blaming the food shortages on the farmers, right? Like that's next, right? It's never, hey, look,
big pharma.
This is a problem. We can, we made some mistakes. We'll try to fix them. It's always like corporate greed or big oil, or now these food shortages are coming. They're going to say, oh, this is the farmer's fault. They did it. It's the rural Americans, right? It's their problem. And start vilifying them rather than taking responsibility. And again, to be fair, because I try to be, I have my biases, but I mean, a lot of politicians do this, right? At some level, both sides, they have a very reluctance to take responsibility for anything. It's a lot of the blame game, and it's non-productive, quite frankly.
And then the result will be we need a new piece of legislation that puts more hands in the power of government. I mean, there are already like some 40,000 people work at the Department of Agriculture. What the hell are they doing all day? Like, seriously, if any of them are listening to this podcast right now, you're the Department of Agriculture. We're already talking about famine in 5 months. Have you had any, PowerPoint presentation or anyone said like, hey guys, we're going to meet in the conference room to talk about the upcoming famine? I know you've done your, LGBTQ awareness month, and I know you've had all of your other meetings that are very essential. But has anyone, and if not, what do you do all day? What's going on in those whole agencies? This is their whole job, and boy, are they so bad at it.
Well, the
right?
baby formula thing was really awful. I mean, that's one that's just glaring. I mean, how could they have missed that? I don't understand how they could, that plant, and I don't know all the details of it, but it seems like this should be something that is, that we were aware this is going to happen prior to it happening. I mean, I don't know, maybe they can't understand everything, but that's been one that's been really brutal. But shifting a little bit to the, Biden's about to take a trip to Saudi, right? Just your thoughts around that. And we mentioned the Saudis earlier a little bit, but is he going to, pander to them? Is he going to be tough on them? Like, what's he going over there to do? He's not... he's sending these nasty letters to the U.S. producers. Is he going to be a tough guy with Saudi, or is he going to go over there and suck up to them and ask them to produce more?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. I just want to be treated as nicely as he treats the Saudi king. I wish the oil and gas industry was treated as well as Maduro in Venezuela, or quite frankly, the Ayatollah in Iran, right? The Biden administration has all these quiet conversations happening to talk to them about, buying their assets and increasing the global supply of oil. The only conversation he's had with the American oil and gas industry is sending these stupid, nasty letters, yelling at us at speeches like he did last Friday in the port of Long Beach, or having his little minions on the Hill, haul us before Congress, not allow us to talk. And as soon as they try to rebut, you say, reclaiming my time, right? And that's the way we get treated. So, yeah, he's going to go to the Saudi king, and he's going to go, hat in hand and ask them, the OPEC was willing to increase an additional 600,000 barrels. Why couldn't it be 900? And what could you do? And, maybe the Saudis will, and maybe the Saudis won't. But, what other big news is happening right now that we're talking about the Saudis? The golf tournament.
Yeah.
Right? Why are the Saudis buying all these golfers? And they're like, they gave Phil Mickelson $200 million. I estimate, and again, this is my back of the envelope calculations, I estimate that the Saudis are making an additional $350 million a day at the current price. So $200 million for Phil Mickelson, they made that by 3 p.m., right? The kingdom did. And that's, so what are they doing with their additional funds? Well, God, I hope it's only that they're buying golfers, right? I also love all the indignation of people like, how dare they accept I guarantee if the Saudis offered me $200 million, I mean, it's $200 million. So I love all the people who are like, that is offensive. It's $200 million and you're not going to turn it down. And you wouldn't have to accept it if the Saudis weren't rich. But we're making the Saudis rich, right? Biden's making them rich. His policies are making them rich. Buying golfers is the least thing we have to worry about. Funding terrorism is something we should be more concerned about, and they're probably doing that too.
Yeah, they are probably. You know what's really rich about this whole thing is it's kind of this is irony here. And I've got a buddy who's a good friend of mine, and he's very strong Democrat, liberal friend of mine that we still get along. And but he's always ribbing me about how you should vote for Democrats because every time they're in office, the oil and gas industry does better than when they're not. And it is kind of counterintuitive and sort of ironic. All the efforts to try to restrict production, to try to disincentivize producers, to try to hurt producers, and then prices go up, and then producers have more cash flow. The other thing they've tried to do is really weaponize the banking system through the ESG narratives. And when you get the Cantillon effect, you've got the people closest to the money, which is like the BlackRocks of the world. They're taking cues and saying, okay, they want ESG. We're the largest money manager in the world. They're pushing all these wind, solar, renewables, batteries, et cetera, EV. So we're gonna ride that wave, and then we're gonna put out letters to our investors and to the financial world saying you need to starve these oil and gas guys for capital. And all these efforts to kind of like hurt the industry in some ways are now making them profitable by raising prices. It's like, if they said, you know what, instead we're going to build, like back in World War II, the Germans were attacking with U-boats and blowing up our oil cargo ships, and the government greenlighted a massive oil pipeline from the Northeast down to the Gulf, and they got it built really fast. Can you imagine them ever doing something like that right now? I mean, they could go in and instead of sending, I'm not going to say the moral case for sending $40 billion or whatever it was to Ukraine, because it's a complicated situation. I'm not a geopolitics expert, but I can tell you that for $40 billion, they could have done a ton of good work in the oil field. They could have built new pipelines from the Northeast that would have lowered the price of natural gas. They could have built new refineries. They could have built new LNG export facilities to help our allies. I mean, there are actual things that they can do. And ironically, if they did those things, it would probably lower the price of oil and gas, which would actually make the oil companies less profitable. So there's just a weird sense of irony in all of it.
There is, and I'm a capitalist through and through. So this doesn't sound like socialism, even though I don't mean this to sound like socialism, but even though it may. But we should be producing so much of it that should almost be free, and not because the state has declared it free, but oil and gas and electricity prices, because of our tremendous oil and gas and coal reserves and just amazing American technological innovation, et cetera. We should be producing it at such a rate of abundance, because that's what happens in a free market if the government doesn't interfere. And examples of that, which, from a different industry, is I always, when I have the chance to talk to people about this, what I mean, the best examples are nose jobs, boob jobs, and LASIK surgery, right? Those are some procedures, some operations, medical operations, don't fall under health insurance for the most part. The government is not involved. The government doesn't regulate it. Like it's very clear. You want your LASIK, you want your boobs done, you want your nose done. You go to the doctor. He tells you this is the price, and you write a check and you give it to them. And over the course of the last 20, 30 years, it's gotten so inexpensive that now LASIK is 2 for 1. Maybe boobs are too. I don't know. But the price has come down to the point that it's a common gift for like graduation. I got my daughter a nose job. Right? Like, oh, that's so sweet of you, right? Why has it gotten? Because when the way the free market works, when they are given the chance to operate, the good that is produced at the lowest price point, the greatest number of people in the most efficient way, right? They don't want nose jobs to be expensive. They want them to be cheap because they want to make their money in volume. And oil and gas and energy as a whole would work exactly the same. And it did in 2018. We don't need a government to order, how to produce more oil. We just need the government to get out of the way, and we will do it ourselves. But we're not doing it because we know that between Gina McCarthy and John Kerry and Jennifer Granholm and Richard Glick at the FERC, and of course the great Deb Haaland at the Secretary of the Interior, right? there's no incentive to produce because government is punishing us. So yeah, you're right. The best way to make the oil and gas industries less money, give them more freedom, right? They will make less money than they are making now if you just allowed them to. But again, you have to believe in freedom to believe that. And Joe Biden does not believe in freedom. He believes in government.
Yeah, they believe in government. That's the part that is makes me very cynical, is that it seems like all solutions come back to government. It's like, oh wait, this over here, free market companies can do that. That's shunned, and then it's in favor of government, and then we're going to get everything from China, which is just a giant government that controls everything, and they like that. I mean, sometimes I think that the policies, they want to emulate China. It's like New York with the Bitcoin mining thing recently, trying to ban it. It's like they saw China do it, and they were like, we want to do that. And so I think that there's a lot of that goes on. It's like, why can't we just have this total control over everything, every industry, et cetera? But it's a good way to kind of wind it down a little bit. But I was going to say, what else has been going on? I mean, you've been, how's Power of the Future going? What have you guys been up to? Anything new developments? You've been heading up to Alaska, doing anything cool lately? What's been going on?
Yeah, no, I'm on the road quite a bit. It's just part of the job because we work mostly at the local and state level. And we are expanding, which is great. So we are on the search for more state directors in some key areas. So that's very promising. Our FERC effort is really important because we need to stop politicizing these industries. I understand the White House is politicized, right? I mean, this is how the person is elected. I understand their government, their cabinet offices are politicized. That's just how it works. But these agencies like FERC should not have, hence Fauci, the FERC, they should not have so much authority over us that some guy named Richard Glick, who no one voted for, and you probably couldn't pick him out of a lineup right now. Yeah. But he is deciding whether or not you can get your pipeline and you're going to get inexpensive natural gas. And he's taking orders from not the science, right? Not the economics, but he's taking orders from special interest green groups. And that's a dangerous precedent that we're setting. So Power of the Future is really busy. It's we were created for this moment. I started the organization a long time ago when oil and gas and coal were just doing their job, right? We weren't under attack. And so we were made for this moment to fight back. And so I'm grateful for you to have the opportunity to talk about these issues because we need to reach as many people as possible.
I think it's important. I think it's, there's got to be a voice for the industry. I think the oil and gas industry has struggled, and not that I'm just oil and gas. I mean, I do try to cover a lot of energy topics. I am just curious and want to learn, but I want the right answers, and I want to hear, a healthy discussion around it. And, if there's things that, I've always been an advocate to say, look, if the oil and gas industry makes a mistake, you got to own it. Like if there's especially things at the environmental level that are in the communities, right? If there's an oil spill or something, that's terrible for the industry. There is any oil and gas operator that's causing environmental damage, the industry needs to come down on them because we have to hold ourselves to a high standard. The part where I get frustrated is that I think the oil and gas industry has done a really good job of being better. And I think that other industries, like we talked about, get a pass. And I also think there's just a lot of misinformation out there about energy, which is what I'm trying to shed a light on with the podcast. And I enjoy you coming on. I like the organization and what you guys do. Your tweets always crack me up. You've always got something to say about what's going on with the on the political side, and it's fun for me to read. So we'll do it again, I'm sure, soon. But thanks again for coming on, Daniel.
No, it's my pleasure, and I love talking to your audience, and hopefully we can do it again. And we were talking, seeing their questions come through, and there's a lot to talk about. And so we'll come back anytime that you'll have me and keep talking about these important issues. So thanks, Max.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for tuning in on the spaces. You guys have been great, and the people that have tuned into the live stream. Daniel, where can people find you and find your organization?
PowerTheFuture.com, or you can email me directly, Daniel@PowerTheFuture.com. Send me your questions, your concerns, your where you think I'm wrong, right? I'd love hearing from people.
Yep, and this episode will be available on your favorite podcast app. I'll try to get it up today, and that you can follow us on YouTube, follow me on Twitter, and thank you guys again. And Daniel, thank you, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks.
All right.